Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 6, and in this occasion, we will be learning about format and presentation in Chapter 6. But before we get to the presentation, let us introduce ourselves first. My name is Adanagina Ferdausi, and we have 5 other members. They are Anissa Rahanita, Diah Nawangwulan, Nabila Sasyaini, Octavia Alfani, and also Pratiwi Puspitasari. Let's get to the presentation. The aim of this part of the curriculum design is to choose the teaching, learning, and techniques and design the lesson plans. While format and other parts of curriculum designs are, the first one is data will be gathered from needs and the environment analysis. The second one is principle. It is used to maximize the learning that come together in activities that involve the learners. The third one is decision. It is decision regarding about constraints, needs, principle, content, and sequencing that will only be indirectly observable through format and presentation. The last one, it will come into the lesson format, or else it will not be happened successfully according the other terms. However, the curriculum design itself sometimes has met the problem. The problems that are commonly found, the first one is communication. The problem is about how teacher and students communicate on how are they aware of the objectives of each activity and why those objectives are important and how the activities should be conducted. Learning is more likely to be effective if the best information is provided on how to reach the objective, what kind of learning involvement is required, and the indication of successful involvement. The second one is a different POV. There are plenty of evidence that teachers and students have different perspectives on certain aspects of lesson. This is according to blog 1994, and students occasionally complete activities in a way that is counterproductive to the activity's intended aim, according to Hasenfeld in 1976. And the third one is information can occur in different places. In a course, information regarding to the lesson may be found in a number of locations or different places. Most likely, titles and direction for each activity in a lesson that are most helpful places to include this information itself. And these are factors that are important to be considered in conducting curriculum design. And these are the principles of curriculum design. The first one is motivation. Students should be excited and interested about the language learning they are in, and they value the learning itself. The second one is for strengths. The course should include a roughly even balance of meaning-focused input and language-focused learning, meaning focused output and fluency activities. The third one is comprehensible input. There should be substantial quantities of interesting, comprehensible, receptive activity in both listening and reading. The fourth one is fluency. A language course should provide activities aimed at increasing fluency, with which learners can use the language they already know, both receptively and productively. The fifth one is output. The learners should be pushed to produce language in both speaking and writing over a range of discourse. And sixth, deliberate learning, meaning the course should include language-focused learning on the sound system, spelling, vocabulary, grammar and discourse areas. 7th, time on task. It is meaning on as much as time as possible should be spent using and focusing on the second language. 8th, depth of processing. Learners should process the items to be learned as deeply as thoughtfully possible. 9th, integrate motivation, meaning a course should be presented so that the learners have the most favorable attitude to the language, the uses of the language, to the teacher's skill in teaching the language, and to their chance of success in learning the language. The last one is learning style, meaning there should be opportunity for learners to work with the learning material way in the most suit their individual learning style.
Okay, I will explain to you about four strands. The first strand is meaning focused input. Meaning focused input involves having the opportunity to learn from listening and speaking. According to Crescent, would call it learning from comprehensible input. The conditions which are needed for such learning are low density of unknown items in the language input, a focus of the meaning of the message, and a large quantity of input. And these are activities can occur in a meaning focused input. The first one is extensive reading. The most important way to provide large volumes of comprehensible input is to have an extensive reading program. It engages the learner in reading books that have been written especially for English learners in controlled vocabulary. Have been many series of such books, and there are hundreds of such books. They are a great source for meaning focus input for learners are primary and secondary levels, and extensive reading is an important part of any general English course. And the second one is listen. Student can listen while reading or read first and listen later. Where listening is not accompanied by visual cues, it is more difficult to learn from listening than reading. Repeat listening is thus a very useful activity. According according to LA, for that one must provide 3 listening opportunities for the same stories in order to measure reasonable learning from the listening input. And the second strand is meaning focus in output. Meaning focus output involves learning through speaking and writing. Learning by input alone is not sufficient because the knowledge needed to comprehend input does not include all the knowledge which is needed to produce output. And these are activities that can occur in a meaning focus output. The first one is writing letter to other student or to the teacher, keeping a diary, writing essay and assignments, writing brief notes to complete something, writing stories and poems, writing description, and writing prompts. And the last one is writing persuasive. The third strand is language focused learning. Language focused learning involves a deliberate focus on language features such as pronunciation, spelling, words, vocabulary collection, grammatical construction, and discourse feature. Language focused learning is an efficient way of quickly learning language feature. And language focused learning can have two main effects. This is explicit and implicit knowledge. Explicit knowledge can help make learners aware of the language feature they will encounter in input. This awareness can help learn from input. And explicit can also generate subconscious implicit knowledge about language item. This is the kind of knowledge required for normal language use. And these are activities can occur in a meaning focused output. The first one is intensive reading, pronunciation practice, quiet writing, spelling practice, fill in the blank activities, sentence completion or sentence training activities, and getting feedback on the written word correction during speaking activities. Learning vocabulary from word cards, memorizing collocation, dictation, and explicit study discourse feature. And the four uh, strengths is fluency development. Fluency involves making the best use of that one knows thus artful or developing fluency is in a subject does not involve learning new language characteristics but involves becoming fluent with characteristics that have been possessed by previous learners. And these are the conditions for the flow of fluency development are the easy and familiar material, focus on communicating the message, pressure to work faster, and lots of opportunities for fluency practice. Listening fluency exercise can involve listening to stories, taking part in interactive activities, and listening to lecture on familiar material. Fluency activities can involve repetitive speaking, which the learner delivers the same speech several times to different audience. Talking about very familiar topics, reading familiar material a lot, and talking about what has been said or written before. Reading fluency activities must involve reading speed in a controlled vocabulary. Such course can substantial fluency gains with just a few minutes of practice 2 or 3 times a week for most learners. According to Chang and Nation, other reading fluency activities include repetitive reading where the learner reads the same text several times and extensive reading which engages the reader at a very easy level. Writing fluency activities involve students in writing about things that brief a lot of previous knowledge. A very useful activity in this trend is writing 10 minutes. In this activity, 2 or 3 times a week, the teacher invites students to write with the condition that the time is exactly 10 minutes. The teacher does not mark any mistake in the writing, but comments about the content of the writing can suggest what other students should write and more about.
Okay, I would like to explain about easy work. You can see on screen about activities and condition for the four strengths. Strengths, the first strength is meaning focus input and condition a focus on the message only small amount of unfamiliar language feature and a large quantity of input. The activities listening to stories, extensive reading, listening while reading, communicative activities. Language learning programs often use a limited number of teaching techniques or activities, which can be beneficial to avoid excessive explanation and focus on actual learning. The importance of analyzing major activities in a course to determine their contribution to effective learning. Comprehension question as a common activity in reading focus course. It explains that while the main goal of comprehension question is understanding message, they can also facilitate vocabulary learning if designed appropriately. If the question involves the use of target vocabulary, the target vocabulary is included in the question itself. And if the answer requires generative use of the target vocabulary, it can enhance vocabulary acquisition. Furthermore, game-like activities which involve learners doing tasks that are not typical of normal language use or learning. It suggests that such activities may motivate learners due to the challenge involved. Their usefulness for learning depends on the extent to which they promote comprehension and retrieval of target words. The next about following a set format. The listen format of this course divides into the following parts. The first one, listening input usually with a meaning focus. The second, language focused learning taking up points from the listening. And the last one, meaning focused output, mainly speaking, often involving pair and group work and a game like activity. That the format should reflect principles such as learning from comprehensible input, language focused learning contributing to output production, a focus on the message in language production, repetition for reinforcement, engagement of learners' interest through various activities. And the last one, the inclusion of variety and unpredictability.
Next, about blocks and threads. There are two ways of planning lessons according to Woodward and Lindstomberg. The first way is called blocks, and the second way is called threads. I will explain about the first way, about block. A block lesson where the lesson has a set format and is a separate block largely complete within itself. Typical block format with listening and reading inputs, language focused activities, and meaning focused outputs. Another format block involves the experience giving stage, the guided practice stage, and then the fluency development stage. Next, I will explain about threads. A thread is an activity that runs through a series of lessons. A thread is an activity that can be used repeatedly with minimal planning and only minor change. For example, teachers prepare interview threads with alternates and learners interview each other in pairs, with pair members changing for each lesson. Look at the table on the side. A little explanation of the order in the table. Namely, the first column explains the purpose of the activity. The second column gives the name of the activity. The third column describes how the activity changes each time it is used. The fourth column, the preparation the teacher must make at the time of installing the thread. And the fifth, show how the activity is carried out individually, in pairs or groups, or with the whole class. Basically, threads can be part of blocks, whereas blocks approach the lesson as a vertical unit. Threads see lessons as made up of horizontal parts that link with other lessons. The use of threads and blocks reduces the need for detailed planning and organization.
Okay, next is techniques and activities. There are a large variety of techniques and activities, but in here I will share the 4 types of techniques and activities. The first type is experience activities. This can be done in several ways. First, the teacher as the controller and helper. The teacher control the students in language, ideas, skills, and etc. Also, the teacher helps the learners to share and recall previous experience to make the following activity easier. And the second is the knowledge needed to the activities provided through previous lesson or previous activities within a lesson, like speaking activities and listening activities and another activity. The second is shared activities, which involve the learners achieving through group work. There are 4 major kinds of group work. The first is the learner in a group should have equal access to the same information. And the second is each learner has a different piece of information essential to the completion of the task.
The third is one or more learners have all the information that the others need, and the last is the learners share the same information but each has a different task to do. Jadi di sini students itu harus sama rata memiliki knowledge and information yang sama, tetapi mereka itu harus mempunyai tugas tasks yang berbeda-beda. The third is guided activities. Guided activities involve the learners doing already partly completed tasks, and guided activities usually involve language focused instruction. They may lead to kind of meaning focused activity where, for example, learners produce sentences based on a model that involves them saying things that are meaningful to them. Like describing themselves, or some lessons which focus on the language activity. This may be satisfactory if learners have many opportunities for meaning-focused language use outside class. And usually, language-focused guide activities are used to prepare learner for meaning-focused experience activities. Like, first is presentation, and the learners do guide tasks and activities like role play or discussion, resulting meaning focused production of language that is like the model. You can see page 100, 102, 102. There is a table there which show us the teaching techniques for listening, speaking, reading, writing, classified according to the type of tasks. Last is independent activities. Independent activities tend to occur late in the course and advanced level. Independent activities, the learners work with no assistance or preparation. Jadi murid ini memang benar-benar belajar mandiri, karena kan namanya juga independent activities. No guide, no helper, no controller, just independent by themselves. Next slide will be delivered by Fanny.
The next is text and presentation. The first is text that divided into two. The first is text support syllabus, that is the final stage in PPP or present practice and produce unit of work. And the text is focused on the structure of the language that has been present. And the second is text-based syllabus, that is text consists of three phases. The first is pre-text, the second is the text cycle, and the third is language focus. And this text is variety and does not focus on specific language structure. And the next is presentation, that the format and presentation is what they think of a curriculum design or designing lesson in sets of lessons. And the most important principle in format and presentation is the balancing of learning opportunities between the four strands. That fourth strand is including meaning-focused input, meaning-focused output, language-focused learning, and the last, fluency development. And the summary of the step of text and presentation is the first, decide on the main teaching technique and activities. The second is plan the format of the lesson. The third is check the format against principles. And the last one is write the lesson. And the next is important job of language teacher is plan. That's focus on the most useful language feature, including content and sequencing. That's for learners considering their present level of proficiency through monitoring and assessment. And finally, planning is made easier by having a clear format to lesson, possibly in the form of blocks or threads. And next is the experience text help learning, by making the text very familiar because it is close to the learner's previous experience. Shared text help learners to learn from each other, and also get text work because the teacher has already done part of the work for the learner in the design of the text, and so the learner simply. And for example, complete a sentence, make a substitution, transform a sentence, or put sentence in order to do the activity. And the next is how the teacher can see the learning progress of the learner through monitoring and assessment. The first is text 1, that is examining the format of the lesson. And this is the step that teacher can follow, study the format used in a course books, and this including typical format of lesson, and then format follow, does if every lesson follow exactly in the same format, or the content of the course based on text, situation, or others, and you can read more about this. And the next is text 2, that is examining teaching technique. And the teacher can follow this question to assess the teaching technique that being used, including way use the technique, or the technique used is well in the situation and or in the teaching practice or not, it is good or bad effect, and all about that, and you can see here. And that's all the presentation from group 6 about format and presentation. Thank you for the attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.